The screaming started at precisely 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in downtown Detroit, and Marcus Williams would never forget that sound as long as he lived. He had been sitting in his patrol car outside Romano's diner, finishing his coffee and scanning through incident reports from the night shift, when the first shriek cut through the early morning air like a knife through silk. Marcus dropped his coffee cup, the dark liquid splashing across his dashboard as he grabbed for his radio. What he saw through his windshield made his blood run cold. A woman in a business suit was running down Woodward Avenue, her heels clicking frantically against the pavement, her briefcase abandoned somewhere behind her. Behind her, stumbling with an unnatural gait, came what Marcus initially thought was a drunk homeless man. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The man's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, his jaw hung slack, and even from 30 feet away, Marcus could see dark fluid dripping from his mouth. The figure moved with jerking, spasmodic movements, yet somehow maintained a relentless pursuit of the fleeing woman. Marcus burst from his patrol car, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon, though he didn't draw it. "Detroit PD. Stop right there," he shouted, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years on the force. The pursuing figure didn't even slow down. It was as if Marcus's words had simply evaporated into the morning air, completely unheard or utterly ignored. The woman stumbled, catching herself against a parked car, and that moment of hesitation was all her pursuer needed. Marcus started running, his police training kicking in automatically, but he was too far away. The gray-skinned man lunged forward with surprising speed, tackling the woman to the ground. Her screams intensified, and Marcus heard something that would haunt him forever, the wet, tearing sound of teeth meeting flesh. "Get off her." Marcus reached them, grabbing the attacker by the collar and yanking hard. The man's head whipped around, and Marcus found himself staring into eyes that held no recognition, no humanity, no consciousness whatsoever. Just hunger. Pure, animalistic hunger. The man's mouth was smeared with blood, and he lunged at Marcus with those snapping jaws. Years of training took over. Marcus shoved the attacker backward, finally drawing his weapon. "I said stop. Last warning." The figure stumbled but immediately began advancing again, arms outstretched, fingers curled into claws, that horrible gurgling moan emanating from its throat. Marcus fired a warning shot into the air. Nothing. The thing kept coming. He fired again, this time aiming for the leg center. Mass training be damned, he wanted to stop the threat, not kill. The bullet struck the attacker's thigh and the man barely flinched. No cry of pain, no collapse, nothing but that same relentless advance. Meanwhile, the woman Marcus had tried to save was climbing to her feet, her hand pressed against a vicious bite wound on her shoulder, blood seeping between her fingers. "Ma'am, stay down. I'm calling an ambulance," Marcus shouted, backing away from the advancing attacker, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. A leg shot should have dropped anyone, but this man acted as if he hadn't even felt it. Marcus's radio crackled to life with multiple voices overlapping in controlled chaos. "All units, we have multiple reports of violent attacks across the downtown area. 10 to 33 emergency, officer needs assistance at Grand Circus Park. Multiple casualties reported at Detroit Receiving Hospital." The radio traffic was exploding with calls, more simultaneous incidents than Marcus had ever heard in his entire career. Something catastrophic was happening, and it was happening fast. The gray-skinned attacker was close now, too close. Marcus made a split-second decision born of instinct rather than protocol. He aimed for the head and fired. The attacker dropped instantly, crumpling to the pavement like a puppet with cut strings. Marcus stood there, breathing hard, his weapon still raised, trying to process what he'd just been forced to do. Behind him, the wounded woman made a strange choking sound. Marcus turned just in time to see her collapse to her knees, convulsing violently, foam bubbling from her lips. "No, no, no. Stay with me." He rushed to her side, reaching for his radio to call for medical assistance. But even as he did, he could see her skin beginning to change, taking on that same terrible grayish hue. Her eyes, which had been brown and terrified just moments ago, were glazing over, becoming milky and distant. All around him, the city was beginning to scream, and Marcus Williams realized with absolute certainty that his world, everyone's world, had just ended. 3 miles across the city, Dr. Jennifer Hayes was in the middle of her morning rounds at Detroit Receiving Hospital when the emergency room doors burst open and all hell broke loose. She had been reviewing charts with nurse practitioner Robert Cole, discussing a patient's elevated white blood cell count, when the first wave of victims came flooding in. "We need help here. Multiple traumas," a paramedic shouted, wheeling in a gurney carrying a man whose arm looked like it had been mauled by an animal. Jennifer snapped into action, her 9 years of emergency medicine experience taking over. "Get him into trauma bay too. Robert, call for surgical consult." But before Robert could reach for the phone, another gurney crashed through the doors, then another and another. Within minutes, the ER had transformed from its usual controlled chaos into something that resembled a war zone. The walking wounded stumbled in on their own, clutching bite marks on arms, legs, shoulders, and faces. Deep, human-shaped bite marks. Jennifer moved from patient to patient, her mind cataloging symptoms with growing unease. Elevated temperatures, rapid onset of fever, aggressive behavior, deteriorating mental status. "Dr. Hayes, you need to see this," Robert called from Bay 4, his voice tight with something Jennifer had never heard from the unflappable nurse: fear. She hurried over to find him standing beside a patient they had admitted just 20 minutes earlier, a teenage boy with a bite wound on his forearm. The boy's skin had turned an ashen gray, his eyes had rolled back in his head, and he was seizing violently on the table. "He was stable just 5 minutes ago," Robert said, checking the monitors. Then his temperature spiked to 105, his blood pressure dropped, and the boy's eyes suddenly snapped open, but they were no longer human eyes. They were clouded, vacant, filled with that same terrible hunger. He lunged at Robert with a guttural snarl, his teeth snapping inches from the nurse's face. Jennifer grabbed a tray stand and shoved it between Robert and the patient, creating a barrier. "Security? We need security in Bay 4 right now." But security wasn't coming. Through the trauma bay window, Jennifer could see absolute pandemonium erupting in the main emergency room. Patients who had been sitting in waiting room chairs were now attacking other patients. Medical staff were screaming and running, and the sounds of growling, moaning, and terror filled the air. "We need to get out of here," Jennifer said, her doctor's instinct to help warring with her survival instinct to flee. The decision was made for her when the boy on the gurney broke free from his restraints with impossible strength and lunged again. Robert grabbed a crash cart and slammed it into the infected patient, knocking him back onto the bed. "Go. I'm right behind you." Jennifer ran, grabbing her emergency medical bag out of pure habit, and burst into the hallway. The scene that greeted her was straight from a nightmare. The hospital had transformed into a slaughterhouse in a matter of minutes. Infected patients and staff members wandered the corridors, attacking anyone who moved. Dr. Raymond Foster, a colleague who had shared coffee with Jennifer just an hour ago, was now stumbling toward her with blood dripping from his mouth and that same dead look in his eyes. Jennifer ducked into a stairwell, Robert close behind her, and they ran upward, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Behind them, they could hear the groans and shuffling footsteps of the infected giving chase. "What the hell is happening?" Robert gasped as they reached the 3rd-floor landing. "I don't know, but we need to find survivors and get to somewhere defensible," Jennifer replied, her medical mind already trying to piece together the epidemiology of what she was witnessing. Rapid transmission through bites, aggressive behavior, loss of cognitive function, apparent insensitivity to pain. It was like every pandemic nightmare scenario rolled into one. They emerged onto the 3rd floor, the administrative wing, which was eerily quiet compared to the chaos below. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Jennifer called out softly. A door to their left creaked open and a face peered out. Maintenance Supervisor Dale Mitchell, along with 3 other staff members who had barricaded themselves in a conference room. "Thank God," Dale breathed, ushering them inside quickly and shutting the door. "We saw everything on the security monitors before they went down. Those things are everywhere. In the ER, the ICU, they're spreading through the whole hospital." Through the conference room window, Jennifer could see the Detroit skyline, and what she witnessed made her stomach drop. Smoke was rising from multiple locations across the city. She could hear distant sirens creating a symphony of disaster, and even from the 3rd floor the screams were audible. Her phone buzzed with an emergency alert, and she pulled it out with trembling hands. The message was brief and terrifying. "Emergency alert. Seek shelter immediately. Avoid contact with infected individuals. Do not approach those displaying aggressive behavior. Military personnel en route. This is not a drill." Jennifer looked at the 5 frightened faces staring at her, waiting for someone to tell them what to do, waiting for someone to make sense of the senseless. She took a deep breath and made a decision. "We survive," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, we figure out how to survive it and we find others doing the same." Across town in the suburb of Dearborn, high school teacher Amanda Price was beginning to understand that the world had fundamentally changed when she heard the principal's voice crackle over the intercom system with barely controlled panic. "Teachers, implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. Keep students away from windows and do not open your doors for any reason until you receive the all-clear from administration." Amanda looked at her classroom of 23 sophomores, their faces reflecting confusion and the first sparks of fear. She had been in the middle of explaining the symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird when the announcement interrupted. "Okay everyone, you heard the principal. Away from the windows, let's move to the back corner of the room. Bring your bags." Amanda kept her voice calm and steady, even as her phone vibrated repeatedly in her pocket with emergency notifications she couldn't check yet. She needed to keep these kids calm. "Miss Price, what's happening?" asked Tommy Bradford, a usually disruptive student who now looked like the frightened 15-year-old he actually was. "I'm sure it's just a precaution," Amanda replied, but her words were cut short by the sound of screaming echoing through the hallways. Not the typical teenage dramatics she was accustomed to, but genuine screams of terror. She moved quickly to her classroom door, engaging the lock and peering through the small window into the corridor. What she saw made her blood freeze. Mr. Peterson, the beloved geometry teacher, was stumbling down the hallway with that same unnatural gait she had seen on the news footage playing on her phone during her planning period. Behind him came 3 more figures, 2 students and the school nurse, all moving with that horrible jerking rhythm. They were pursuing a group of running students, and Amanda watched in horror as one of the infected lunged forward and grabbed a girl by her backpack, pulling her down. "Everyone get into the supply closet now," Amanda commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the rising panic in her classroom. "Not a sound, you understand me? Not a single sound." The students scrambled toward the large storage closet at the back of her room, designed to hold textbooks and supplies but now serving as a desperately inadequate shelter. Amanda grabbed the baseball bat she kept behind her desk, officially for the school softball team, unofficially for her own peace of mind in an occasionally rough school, and positioned herself between her students and the door. Through the small window, she could see the infected had heard the movement in her room. They were turning, multiple sets of dead eyes fixing on her door, and they began shuffling toward her classroom with terrible purpose. Her phone buzzed again and this time she glanced at it. A text from her sister Rachel. "Amanda, if you're alive, get out of the city. They're everywhere. Heading north to the cabin. Find us there." Before she could respond, the first body slammed against her classroom door. Meanwhile, in downtown Detroit, Marcus Williams had made his way back to the 3rd Precinct station house, hoping to find organization and answers. Instead, he found barely controlled chaos. The station parking lot was filled with patrol cars abandoned at haphazard angles, the front entrance had been barricaded with desks and filing cabinets, and inside, he found maybe 20 officers and civilians who had made it to what they hoped was safety. Sergeant Frank Miller, a 30-year veteran whom Marcus had always considered unshakable, was coordinating the survivors with hands that trembled slightly as he marked positions on a map of the city. "Marcus, thank God. We need every able body we've got," Frank said without preamble. "What's the situation out there?" Marcus set down the emergency supplies he had scavenged from his patrol car. "It's bad, Frank. Worse than bad. I've seen at least 50 of those things, maybe more. They don't stop unless you hit the brain. Body shots don't work, pain doesn't stop them, nothing stops them except destroying the head." Frank nodded grimly, confirming what several other officers had already reported. "We've lost contact with Central Command. Radio chatter suggests the infection or whatever this is has spread across the entire metropolitan area, maybe beyond. Military was supposed to be en route 3 hours ago, but we haven't seen any sign of them." He pointed to the map, where he had marked various locations with red X's. "Hospitals are overrun, that's where this thing seems to have spread fastest. Shopping districts, schools, anywhere with high population density is gone. We've got reports of survivors holed up in various locations, but we don't have the manpower to mount rescue operations." Marcus studied the map, his tactical training kicking in despite the surreal nightmare of their situation. "We can't stay here long term. This building has too many access points, not enough supplies. We need to think about consolidation, finding somewhere more defensible." "Agreed," said a new voice. Officer Lisa Chang stepped forward, her uniform torn and bloodied but her eyes sharp and focused. I'm suggesting the River Rouge plant. My brother worked there. It's a fortress, chain-link fencing all around the perimeter, limited access points, and it's got its own generator and water system. Frank considered this, then looked around at the frightened but determined faces of the survivors. All right. We'll send out a scouting party, see if it's viable. Marcus, Lisa, you're with me. The rest of you, fortify this position and maintain radio watch. If we're not back in 2 hours, don't wait for us. As Marcus checked his weapon and prepared to head back into the hellscape that Detroit had become, he thought about the woman he had failed to save that morning, how quickly she had turned, how her humanity had been stripped away in minutes. He wondered how many people were still out there, scattered across the city, fighting to survive minute by minute. He wondered if humanity had any chance at all, or if this was simply the end, written in blood and moaning death. But wondering wouldn't save anyone, so Marcus pushed those thoughts aside, nodded to his fellow officers and prepared to step once more into the apocalypse. The journey from the 3rd Precinct to the River Rouge plant should have taken 15 minutes by car, but Marcus, Frank and Lisa quickly discovered that the normal rules no longer applied to their city. Every street presented a new nightmare, every corner held potential death. They moved on foot, having abandoned their patrol car after the 3rd blocked intersection filled with crashed vehicles and wandering infected. Marcus led the way, his service weapon drawn, while Lisa covered their rear and Frank navigated using a paper map. Their phones had lost signal an hour ago as the cellular network finally collapsed under the strain. The silence was somehow worse than the chaos. Detroit had become a ghost town punctuated by distant screams and the constant, low moaning of the infected that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. They were cutting through an alley behind a strip of closed shops when they heard it, a rhythmic banging sound coming from above. Marcus held up a fist, signaling the others to stop. He looked up and saw a face in a second-story window. A young man, maybe 25, was pressed against the glass, banging desperately to get their attention while carefully avoiding making too much noise. Behind him, Marcus could see 2 other people, an older woman and a child. The young man pointed frantically at the street, then at himself, then made a gesture of desperation. "We can't save everyone," Frank said quietly, the words clearly causing him physical pain. "We don't have the resources, we don't have the manpower, and every minute we delay puts our mission at risk." Marcus stared up at that window, at those frightened faces, and felt something harden in his chest. "No," he said firmly. "We're not leaving them. We're supposed to protect and serve Frank. That doesn't stop because the world went to hell." Lisa was already assessing the building. "Fire escape on the north side looks intact. We can get up there, but we need to be fast. There's a group of infected 2 blocks down, and if they catch our scent or hear us, we'll be swimming in them." The decision made, they moved quickly. Marcus climbed the fire escape first, testing each rusted step carefully before committing his weight. He reached the window and the young man inside immediately began working to open it. The window stuck, painted shut by years of neglect, but desperation gave the man strength and it finally screeched open. Thank God," the young man breathed. "I'm Kevin Morris. This is my mom Patricia and my nephew Danny. We've been trapped here since yesterday. Those things are in the building, in the apartment below us. We blocked the door but—" His words were cut short by the sound that had become the soundtrack to the apocalypse, the low, guttural moaning of the infected, but this time much closer. "We need to move now," Marcus said, helping Patricia through the window. She was in her 60s, moving stiffly, and Marcus could see the exhaustion and terror etched into every line of her face. Danny, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, clutched a stuffed dinosaur and looked at Marcus with eyes too old for his young face. "I'll carry the boy," Lisa volunteered, already reaching for Danny. "Kevin, help your mother down the fire escape. Marcus, cover us." They had made it down 3 levels when the door to the fire escape burst open and 5 infected stumbled out onto the metal platform. Frank didn't hesitate, he fired 3 quick shots and 3 of the infected dropped. The sound of gunfire, however, was like ringing a dinner bell. From the street below and the buildings around them, infected began emerging, drawn by the noise like moths to flame. "Go, go, go!" Marcus shouted, and they practically fell down the remaining levels of the fire escape. They hit the ground running, Lisa carrying Danny, Kevin supporting his mother, Frank and Marcus providing cover fire. The infected were closing in from multiple directions, a shambling horde that was terrifying in its relentlessness. They rounded a corner and nearly ran straight into another group of survivors, a woman in hospital scrubs, a man in maintenance coveralls, and 3 others who looked like hospital staff. The woman in scrubs, Jennifer, Marcus would learn later, was carrying a medical bag and a metal pipe she had clearly used as a weapon. "This way," she shouted. We found a delivery truck with keys still in it. The two groups merged without hesitation, survival creating instant alliance. They ran as a single unit toward a loading dock where, as promised, a delivery truck sat waiting like a mechanical savior. Dale Mitchell, the maintenance supervisor, was already in the driver's seat, engine running. "Everyone in the back now?" They piled into the cargo area, Marcus and Frank being the last ones in, firing shots to keep the infected at bay as Dale floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, knocking several infected aside like bowling pins, and then they were moving, really moving, putting distance between themselves and immediate death. In the back of the truck, 12 survivors from different parts of the city sat in darkness, breathing hard, processing the fact that they were still alive. Marcus found himself sitting next to Jennifer, both of them checking their weapons and supplies with the automatic movements of people whose professions had trained them to act in crisis. "Where are you headed?" Jennifer asked. "River Rouge plant. Supposed to be defensible." "You?" Marcus replied. "We were just trying to get out of the hospital, out of the city. Didn't have a plan beyond survive the next 5 minutes." Jennifer managed a grim smile. "Guess we've got a plan now." Frank called from the front of the truck where he was sitting with Dale. "We've got a problem. Main roads are completely blocked. We're going to have to take surface streets and it's going to take us through some heavily populated areas." Marcus looked around at the frightened, exhausted, but determined faces surrounding him. Somewhere in the city, he knew, Amanda was still protecting her students, waiting for rescue that might never come. Somewhere, other survivors were making the same desperate calculations, fighting the same impossible odds. "Then we better make every shot count," Marcus said, checking his ammunition. Outside the truck, Detroit burned and the infected ruled the streets, but inside humanity was beginning to learn how to fight back. The River Rouge plant loomed before them like a rusted cathedral to industry, its chain-link fences and concrete walls suddenly appearing beautiful to eyes that had seen too much death in too few hours. Dale navigated the delivery truck through an obstacle course of abandoned vehicles and wandering infected, finally pulling up to the main gate. Marcus jumped out first, weapon raised, scanning for threats while Frank worked on the heavy padlock securing the entrance. "We've got company," Lisa called out, pointing back down the access road where a group of at least 30 infected had spotted them and were shambling forward with that terrible, inexorable persistence. Frank's hands shook as he tried key after key from the maintenance ring Dale had provided. Come on, he muttered. The fourth key turned and the lock snapped open. They pushed the gates wide enough for the truck to pass through, then immediately secured them again as the first infected reached the fence, pressing against it with mindless hunger. Inside the plant's main building they found exactly what Lisa had promised. A defensible structure with solid walls, multiple levels for observation and most importantly, supplies. The break room still had vending machines full of snacks and drinks, the maintenance shop had tools and materials for fortification, and the generator room held enough diesel fuel to keep them powered for weeks if they were careful. But they weren't alone. As Marcus's group began to explore, they heard voices, human voices, coming from the upper administrative level. Weapons raised, they climbed the stairs cautiously, until they rounded a corner and came face to face with another group of survivors. A tense moment passed, both groups sizing each other up, fingers on triggers until a familiar voice called out. "Hold your fire. Marcus, is that you?" Officer James Parker, who had been on patrol in the industrial district when everything went to hell, lowered his rifle and broke into a relieved grin. Behind him stood 15 other survivors, factory workers who had been on the early shift, a few residents from nearby homes and 2 other police officers. The reunion was brief but emotional. In a world that had collapsed in less than 24 hours, finding other survivors felt like discovering lost family. James quickly briefed them on what they had learned. "The infection is everywhere. We've been monitoring radio traffic. What's left of it anyway? Chicago has gone dark, same with Cleveland. Reports from the East Coast suggest it started there, maybe New York or Boston, but it spread so fast that nobody's certain of anything anymore. The military established quarantine zones in some cities, but most of those have been overrun." He pulled out a battery-powered radio and turned up the volume. Through the static came a recorded message playing on loop. "This is the emergency broadcast system. If you can hear this message, proceed to the nearest evacuation center or shelter in place. Avoid all contact with infected individuals. Military rescue operations are ongoing. Do not attempt to travel alone. This message will repeat." Jennifer listened to the broadcast with a clinical ear, her medical training analyzing what wasn't being said as much as what was. They're not giving specific locations for evacuation centers, which means they either don't exist anymore or they're too overrun to accept more people. And notice they said, ongoing, not imminent. That's government speak for, don't hold your breath. She looked around at the gathered survivors, 31 people total now, ranging from 7-year-old Danny still clutching his stuffed dinosaur to Patricia Morris who had to be in her late 60s. We need to assume we're on our own for the foreseeable future. That means we need organization, rationing, security, and medical protocols. Marcus nodded, recognizing the shift that was happening. They were transitioning from panicked flight to intentional survival. We should set up a perimeter watch, rotating shifts so everyone gets rest. Frank, you're the ranking officer. What do you think? Frank stepped forward, and Marcus could see the veteran sergeant pushing aside his fear and exhaustion to embrace the leadership role circumstance had thrust upon him. Agreed. We fortify this position first. James, take 3 people and do a complete sweep of the building. I want to know every entrance, every weak point, every resource we have. Lisa, you're on inventory, food, water, medical supplies, weapons, ammunition, everything. Marcus, you and I will set up a security rotation and start planning for long-term defense. He paused, looking at each face in turn. I'm not going to lie to you. Things are bad, worse than bad. But we're alive, we're together, and we're going to stay that way. This plant is our home now, and we defend it with everything we've got. The survivors dispersed to their assigned tasks with a sense of purpose that felt almost normal, a return to structure in a world that had lost all structure. But even as they worked to transform the industrial plant into a fortress, Marcus found his thoughts drifting to the city beyond their gates. How many others were out there, trapped and desperate like Amanda and her students? How many small pockets of survivors were fighting their own lonely battles, not knowing if they were the last humans left alive? He walked to a window overlooking the fence line and watched the infected pressing against the chain link, their numbers growing as more and more were drawn to the signs of life within. In the distance, Detroit's skyline was barely visible through smoke and approaching dusk. Somewhere in that urban graveyard, Amanda Price made her own desperate decision. She had kept her students alive through the first day, hidden in the storage closet while the infected wandered the hallways outside, but night was falling and they had no food, no water, and no guarantee that their barricaded door would hold until morning. She pulled out her phone, its battery at 3%, and read her sister's message one more time. A cabin up north. Sanctuary maybe, or at least a chance. She looked at the 23 frightened faces staring at her in the dim light filtering under the closet door and made a choice. They would wait until full dark when maybe, just maybe, the infected would be less active. Then they would run for the staff parking lot, run for her car, and run for any hope of survival. Amanda closed her eyes and sent a silent prayer to anyone or anything that might be listening. Then she gripped her baseball bat tighter and prepared to lead her students through hell, because that's what teachers did. They protected their kids even when the world was ending. Across the city, in dozens of scattered locations, other survivors were making similar calculations, preparing similar desperate gambles. Humanity's first day in the apocalypse was ending, and those who remained were learning the most important lesson of all. To survive, you had to be willing to fight. 3 days had passed since Marcus and the others had secured the River Rouge plant, and in that time they had transformed the industrial complex into something resembling a functional stronghold. The fence line had been reinforced with scavenged materials, a watch rotation kept constant surveillance on all approaches, and the group had settled into an uneasy rhythm of survival. But supplies were becoming a critical issue. Jennifer had inventoried their resources with ruthless precision, and the numbers didn't lie. With 31 mouths to feed, they had maybe 2 weeks of food if they rationed carefully, less if more survivors arrived. We need to make a supply run, Marcus said during the morning security briefing, spreading a map across the conference table they had repurposed as a planning station. There's a warehouse complex about 2 miles east, used to supply restaurants across the city. If it hasn't been completely looted, we could find enough food to last us months. Frank studied the map, his finger tracing potential routes. 2 miles through infected territory. We'd need vehicles, armed escorts, and a lot of luck. Lisa leaned over the map, pointing to an alternate route. The old service road runs along the river. It's longer but less populated. Fewer infected means fewer risks. The debate continued for another 20 minutes before they settled on a plan. They would take 2 vehicles, the delivery truck and a pickup they had found in the plant's motor pool, with 8 people divided between them. Marcus would lead, accompanied by Lisa, James, and 5 others including Kevin Morris, who had proven himself surprisingly capable with a rifle during their fence-line defense drills. Jennifer insisted on coming as well, arguing that her medical expertise might be needed and that she could identify useful pharmaceutical supplies if they encountered any. At dawn the next morning, they gathered at the gates, checking weapons and reviewing the plan one final time. The journey started smoothly. The service road was relatively clear, and they encountered only scattered infected that were easily avoided. But as they approached the warehouse district, they saw signs that others had been there first. Several buildings showed evidence of forced entry, and supplies had clearly been looted, though haphazardly and in panic rather than with any systematic approach. They were checking the third warehouse, loading boxes of canned goods and dried pasta into the truck bed, when Marcus heard something that made him freeze, a voice calling for help, young and terrified. "Did you hear that?" he asked Lisa, who nodded and pointed toward a strip mall across the street. In the second-floor window of what appeared to be a tutoring center, Marcus could see movement. He raised his binoculars and felt his heart skip. There were people up there and not just a few. He could see at least 20 faces pressed against the windows, and many of them looked young. Very young. "We've got survivors, possible civilians, heavy concentration," Marcus reported into his radio. James, who was coordinating the loading operation, responded immediately. "Can we reach them safely?" Marcus studied the situation. The strip mall was surrounded by infected, maybe 40 or 50, all clustered around the building's entrance as if they had been laying siege. Negative. Too many infected, and they're concentrated at the only obvious entrance. He was about to suggest they mark the location and return with more people when one of the windows opened and someone began waving frantically. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see a woman with dark hair holding up a sign made from what looked like poster board. The message was simple and desperate: 23 students. No food. Please help. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Students. A teacher had managed to keep nearly 24 kids alive for 3 days in the middle of hell, and they were running out of time. "Change of plans," Marcus said, his voice carrying the tone of absolute decision. "We're getting those people out." Frank's voice crackled over the radio, concern evident. "Marcus, that's not the mission. We're here for supplies, not rescue operations." "We don't have the resources," Marcus cut him off. "Frank, those are kids up there. I didn't become a cop to leave kids to die. We're doing this." He turned to Lisa and the others. "James, Kevin, you're with me. Lisa, get the truck in position at the base of the fire escape on the north side of the building. We're going to draw the infected away from the entrance, make enough noise to pull them toward us, then we get those people down and into the vehicles before the horde regroups." It was a risky plan, possibly a suicidal one, but as Marcus looked at those desperate faces in the window, he knew there was no other choice. They had spent 3 days building walls and hiding behind fences. Now it was time to remember what it meant to be human. Kevin positioned himself on the roof of the pickup truck with a hunting rifle, while Marcus and James moved to opposite ends of the street, creating a triangle of fire. "On my mark," Marcus said into his radio. 3, 2, 1, mark. The 3 of them opened fire simultaneously, not aiming to kill but to make noise, to draw attention. The effect was immediate. The infected surrounding the strip mall turned as one, their collective consciousness, if it could be called that, focusing on this new stimulus. They began shuffling toward the sources of the gunfire, and Marcus kept shooting, kept making noise, drawing them further away from the building. Lisa drove the truck forward to the fire escape and honked the horn twice, the signal. In the second-floor window, Amanda Price heard that horn and felt tears of relief streaming down her face. She had kept her students alive through 3 days and nights of absolute terror, rationing the few snacks from her desk drawer, keeping them quiet when infected wandered the hallways below, maintaining hope when she had none left herself. Now, impossibly, rescue had arrived. "Everyone move, just like we practiced," Amanda commanded, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Tommy, you're first down the fire escape. Then Emily, then groups of 3. No running, no pushing, stay calm." The students moved with the discipline fear and 3 days of preparation had instilled in them. Amanda had drilled them on this, knowing that if rescue came or if they had to flee, panic would kill them faster than the infected. One by one they descended the fire escape and climbed into the waiting truck. Marcus watched the evacuation while continuing to fire controlled bursts, keeping the infected focused on him rather than the fleeing survivors. His ammunition was running low and the horde was getting closer. "Lisa, how many are loaded?" he called into the radio. 21 so far, 3 more coming down plus 1 adult," she responded. Marcus did the math. They had maybe 2 minutes before the infected reached his position, maybe less. He fired his last magazine, then drew his backup weapon. Kevin, fall back to the vehicles. James, same. Move now. The three of them ran, the infected horde following like a tsunami of dead flesh. Marcus reached the truck just as Amanda, the last person down the fire escape, tumbled into the cargo bed. Go, 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 he shouted, slamming his fist against the truck's side. Dale, who had driven the delivery truck in their convoy, punched the accelerator and both vehicles lurched forward, infected grasping at their bumpers and sides but unable to stop their momentum. They tore through the warehouse district, infected in pursuit, and didn't slow down until they were back on the service road with clear distance between them and the horde. In the back of the truck, Amanda Price sat among her students, all 23 of them still alive, still breathing, and she finally let herself break down and sob with relief. Marcus caught her eye through the rear window and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of what she had accomplished. She had kept them alive. Now they would learn together what came next, how to not just survive, but to resist, to fight back, to reclaim their world from the dead point. 2 months after the world ended, the River Rouge plant had become more than just a refuge. It had become a beacon of hope in the darkness. What started as 31 desperate survivors had grown to nearly 200 people, drawn by radio broadcasts that Marcus and his team transmitted every evening on multiple frequencies. The message was simple: River Rouge is secure. We have food, water, and safety. If you can hear this, you're not alone. The plant's transformation was remarkable. The chain-link fence had been reinforced with welded metal plates scavenged from the factory floor, guard towers constructed from scaffolding provided overlapping fields of fire, and a systematic expansion had cleared the infected from a 3-block radius around their perimeter. Jennifer had established a functioning medical clinic in the old administrative offices, complete with supplies gathered from a dozen successful scavenging runs. Amanda's classroom had moved from a high school to the plant's cafeteria, where she taught not just her original 23 students but another 30 children who had found their way to safety. But survival alone was no longer enough, and that's what brought the core leadership group together on this cold November morning. Marcus stood before a detailed map of Detroit, marked with colored pins representing known survivor settlements, infected concentrations, and potential resource locations. Around the table sat Frank, Jennifer, Lisa, Amanda, James, and 3 representatives from other survivor groups they had made contact with. Michael Torres from a fortified shopping mall in Warren, Grace Washington, who led a community of 60 people in an old fire station, and Robert Hayes, Jennifer's brother, who had arrived 2 weeks ago with a group from Ann Arbor. We've done well establishing our defenses, Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had led people through impossible circumstances. But defense isn't enough anymore. We're not just fighting to survive day to day, we need to start taking back our city, our world. Jennifer pulled out a notebook filled with observations she had compiled over 8 weeks of studying the infected. I've been documenting their behavior and I've found patterns. They're drawn to noise and movement, yes, but they're also less active in extreme cold. With winter coming, we have an opportunity. They're slower, more sluggish, easier to manage. She flipped to another page. I've also confirmed what we suspected. The infection is transmitted through bites and fluid exchange, but it doesn't spread through air or water. That means contained environments can be truly safe if we can clear them completely. Michael Torres leaned forward, his weathered face intense. My people have been mapping the city, tracking infected movement. They migrate, following some kind of pattern we don't fully understand yet. There are entire neighborhoods that are nearly empty at certain times. If we could coordinate strikes, multiple groups hitting different areas simultaneously, we could start reclaiming territory block by block. The conversation that followed was intense and strategic. They discussed tactics, resources, communication protocols, and the harsh reality that offensive operations would mean casualties. Frank, who had lost 3 people during a supply run just last week, voiced the concern that weighed on everyone. Every person we lose is irreplaceable. We're not just talking about soldiers here, we're talking about teachers, doctors, mechanics, people with skills we desperately need to rebuild. How do we balance the need for action against the need to preserve our population? It was Amanda who provided the answer, her voice quiet but firm. We can't let fear paralyze us. I kept my students alive by being cautious, yes, but also by being willing to act when action was necessary. If we just hide behind our walls, we're not living, we're just dying slowly. These children deserve better than a world of fences and fear. Her words hung in the air, and Marcus saw heads nodding around the table. They were ready, not just ready but eager to stop being victims and start being fighters. Over the next 3 hours, they hammered out the details of what they called Operation Reclamation. Phase 1 would begin in 2 weeks, targeting a hospital complex that Jennifer desperately wanted for its medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies. 3 teams from different settlements would coordinate their assault, clearing the building floor by floor, room by room. They would document their tactics, learn from their mistakes, and use each operation to train for the next. It was ambitious, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. As the meeting broke up and people dispersed to their various responsibilities, Marcus found himself standing at the window overlooking their compound. In the courtyard below, life continued in ways that would have seemed impossible 2 months ago. Children played under careful supervision, their laughter a defiant sound in a world of moaning death. Kevin Morris was teaching a group of teenagers basic maintenance skills, passing on knowledge that would be crucial for their survival. Dale and his crew were installing solar panels on the roof, working toward energy independence. Lisa approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee, real coffee from a successful raid on a warehouse last week. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, handing him a cup. Marcus accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. "I was just thinking about that first day, seeing that woman turn, feeling completely helpless. We've come a long way since then." Lisa nodded, her eyes distant. "We've lost people too. Good people. But we've also found something I didn't think was possible anymore: purpose." She gestured to the courtyard. "We're not just surviving anymore, Marcus. We're building something. A community, a resistance, maybe even a future." Marcus smiled, feeling the truth of her words. They had been tested by fire and had not broken. They had faced the end of everything and had chosen to fight rather than surrender. That evening, as the sun set over the ruins of Detroit, Marcus stood in the radio room and delivered their nightly broadcast. But tonight's message was different, stronger, filled with a determination that had been forged through weeks of hardship and sacrifice. "This is River Rouge calling any survivors in range. We are secure, we are growing, and we are fighting back. The infected took our world, but we're going to reclaim it, 1 block, 1 building, 1 city at a time. If you can hear this, know that you're not alone. Humanity is still here, still fighting, still hoping. Find us, join us, or establish your own stronghold and contact us. Together we are stronger than the Horde. Together we will survive. Together we will win." As his voice echoed across the airwaves, reaching desperate ears in hidden shelters across the region, Marcus Williams allowed himself something he hadn't felt since the world ended: hope. Not blind optimism, but the hard-earned hope of people who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. The battle for humanity's future had only just begun, but for the first time since the dead began to walk, the living were ready to fight. And in the growing darkness, in dozens of scattered locations, survivors heard that broadcast and felt something stir in their hearts. The belief that maybe, just maybe, they could take their world back. The long journey from panic to resistance was complete. Now came the even longer journey from resistance to victory, and humanity took its first determined steps into that uncertain future together. The end.